I'm Lynn Vaccaro with the Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, and I'm thrilled to have all of you here with us so we can talk about the New Hampshire Salt Marsh Plan, which is really a suite of spatial planning resources and a management framework that we think, by working in partnership with all of you, can really help us, sustain and protect our salt marshes into the future. So I'm going to just start with just some quick housekeeping. So next slide. So just a couple notes here about our webinar here today that's pretty informal. I'm going to ask that everybody keep themselves muted to ensure kind of a good audio connection. We love seeing faces, but if you find you're struggling with your internet connection at all, turning off your webcam can save bandwidth. You probably all saw as you joined the meeting that we are recording this webinar, and so we'll plan to take kind of the presentation portion of today's webinar and actually make that available on YouTube afterwards. So hopefully folks are okay with that. And throughout this program this morning, we encourage you to use the chat, add in comments, add in questions, links that you might want to share. We're likely going to save discussion of those questions until the very end, but you're welcome to put them in at any point, and we'll be kind of keeping an eye on them. So just a quick introduction to the host here for today's program. This is the Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve that several of us work for that are on the call today. And this is a state-federal partnership program. There's several of them that work in the coastal region. We're a national network, 30 reserves around the country. In New Hampshire, the host for the reserve is New Hampshire Fish and Game. And our federal partner is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that provides about 70% of our funding. And our mandate is actually really relevant to today's program. We are a research reserve, so applied research and monitoring is a core part of what we do, but we also manage land and take care of the land and the waters around Great Bay. So we're in a really good position to be able to kind of understand the decision support needs and the information needs of natural resource managers. And then we're able to really kind of use ourselves as users and then invite people onto our lands to kind of learn alongside us as we try to hone information and techniques, for example, restoration techniques that we think are useful on our lands, but then hopefully have some relevance across the coastal region of New Hampshire. So next slide. So these are the voices that you're going to be hearing from today. Rachel Stevens is our wildlife ecologist, GIS specialist, and stewardship coordinator at the Great Bay Reserve. And in addition to the Salt Marsh Plan that we're talking about today, Rachel actually has done a number of really slick decision support tools to support things like trail management and invasive species management. So we'll encourage you to check those out as well. You'll also be hearing a little bit from Corey Riley, our manager, who's been involved in the development of the New Hampshire Salt Marsh Plan from the very beginning and facilitated the collaborative process that really provided a lot of input into the development of this set of resources. You're also going to be hearing from Kevin Lucey. He's the habitat coordinator with the Department of Environmental Services Coastal Program, and he's also been a thought partner in the development of the Salt Marsh Plan from the very beginning and also provided some of the funding. And we'll hear as well from Sarah Large, who's a wetland scientist with FB Environmental, which is a relatively small environmental consulting firm. And through her work with municipalities and with agencies, she's actually used some of the Salt Marsh Plan data. And so we're really excited to have her share some of those examples. So we're grateful for Kevin and Sarah kind of jumping in and providing some context to the presentation this morning. So here's just a quick outline for what we're doing. Kevin's going to share a little bit of context. Rachel's going to be doing the bulk of the presentation. She's got probably about 30 minutes. She'll give you a complete overview of what this Salt Marsh Plan and all of the different resources are all about. Sarah will share some examples from her work of how she's put them into use. And then Corey's going to facilitate the Q&A and the discussion at the end. So I think with that, I'm going to invite Kevin to come off mute and provide a little bit of context for the topic today.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. It's nice to be here. My name is Kevin Lucey. I'm the Habitat Coordinator at the New Hampshire Coastal Program, which is part of the Watershed Management Bureau at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Coastal Program is fortunate to have partnered with Gibner for the past, or since 2019, on advancing the Salt Marsh Plan. And I'm delighted to give some opening remarks to set the context of how the Salt Marsh Plan fits within existing management structures within the state, as well as for stakeholder needs in New Hampshire. As I mentioned, the coastal program is part of the Watershed Management Bureau, and the Watershed Management Bureau has the responsibility of the state of assessing the state's waters. And I wanted to start my remarks with talking about the Watershed Management Bureau because there are many parallels between what they do and what the Salt Marsh Plan is comprised of. So in general, our biology department, our biology section at the Watershed Management Bureau, they're the folks that go and collect samples. Our water quality planning section, they're the ones that analyze the results and also characterize the results to determine whether those water bodies meet certain aquatic life use criteria, such as swimming or drinking water. And then our watershed assistants and our coastal programs use those data to help stakeholders manage our waters and work with stakeholders to sustain good water quality or to restore water quality. Next slide, please. So the Watershed Management Bureau hosts various mappers, including this one, which has water quality results and impairment results for all of the state's waters. Next slide, please. The basis of how we do our business of determining whether water bodies meet water quality criteria is by breaking up all of our water bodies into smaller management units. They're called assessment units. So this map here shows all these various lengths of river and sections of the estuary that are all clickable, and you can pull up these database attributes that show, say for instance, this Cromet Creek, and has these various data available, as well as report cards to say whether the water body meets criteria for fish consumption or for pH or acid deposition and other things. Next slide. So the coastal program was established in 1982, and over that time, we've been supporting partners with grant funding from NOAA for the identification and characterization of tidal wetlands. As with most industries, coastal management requires us to adopt new technologies, and in this case, as the resolution of aerial photos and computer capabilities improve. So in the 1980s, it was, the goal was simply, where are our marshes and how many do we have? In the 1990s, we transitioned to understanding or to incorporating new computer models such as GIS, which is now ubiquitous. And by 2007, you might be surprised to know that we were still using film, aerial photos, and using film and hand drawing what we could see from those film negatives. By 2016, however, we transitioned to an all digital model of characterizing tidal wetlands using aerial photos. And this relies on computer trained computer models that not only identify acreage and position, but also can characterize minute details in the marsh plain, such as specific species of plants and also mixes of plants. Next slide. So this is an example of how resolution of our mapping has improved over time. So this is a depiction of an area near the Winnicott River in Great Bay, and this is showing the national estuarine or national wetland inventory maps. And so you can see these large polygons that indicate whether it's a vegetated marsh or whether it's mudflat, for instance. Next slide. So these high resolution tidal wetland maps, which are derived, this is depicting a 2013 condition, shows all of these attributes on the marsh plain, such as high marsh and low marsh species, but as well as Phragmites, the invasive plant, as well as brackish plant communities. Next slide. We also have a more detailed version of that layer that breaks out those high marsh into various categories, such as high marsh mix, so Spartina patens or Disticus spicata, and just the degree of resolution that we now have enables us to do additional analyses. And one of the exciting things that we're looking forward to is that we recently procured new aerial photos of our estuaries in August of 2023, and we plan to look at change analysis using these maps between 2013 and 2023. And that's going to provide us really powerful information about how our marshes are changing, whether the shorelines are changing, or whether plant communities within the marsh are changing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, and she's going to describe how we're using some of these data to help our communities and stakeholders make decisions. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. And those maps were created for us by our partners at NOAA's Office of Coastal Management, and are foundational to this marsh plan that we've put together that is analogous to the report cards that Kevin just overviewed. So we've been talking about this marsh plan using draft data for a long time, but now we've got everything finalized. We wanted just to talk today a little bit about how we can put that information to use to support some decisions we're making. We're all investing in these tidal wetlands and salt marshes so much because they provide low or no cost ecosystem services indicated in this slide. And they also have been identified by our State Wildlife Action Plan as being one of the most threatened habitats in the entire state. Of the around 6,000 acres that we have currently, it's projected that we'll lose about a quarter of that with a sea level rise of 1.5 meters by 2100. We know these are dynamic systems, so it's not all bad news. We also have potential for almost 4,000 acres as marsh spreads inland, as sea levels rise. But because we are in this period of coastal change, we totally recognize that it's important to work collaboratively and on as many shared goals together as possible. So this group of partners came together trying to identify a plan that really helped us to prioritize our successes for both land protection, for marsh management, looking at restoration and adaptation projects, and for research and policy that affects marshes. So just quickly to put names to some of those logos, all of these people have been really instrumental in helping us out along the way. And I just wanted to do a particular shout out to Katie Callahan, Fish and Games GIS specialist, who has done the majority of the GIS modeling for us. So our approach was to look at various different metrics in the broad categories of current condition of marsh, those that look at the vulnerability of the marsh to sea level rise, and then also look at its adaptive capacity or adaptive potential, and together those metrics assess marsh resilience. This was downscaled from a national product. This shows the results on a traffic light scale, where the most resilient marshes are in green and the least in red. It was put together with reviews from experts on all coasts, and you can see sort of the mid-Atlantic, New England has, southern New England has the most imperiled marshes, and the Southeast has our most resilient marshes, along with some of the North and West coast. And nationwide, as this took place over the lower 48, the least resilient marshes were in New York. If you know the tidal, the Hudson River, most of the tidal wetlands are along that high-sided river valley with a railroad running along it, and our most resilient were in Georgia. So for us, locally in New Hampshire, we use the same approach, but with these metrics. And then we also divided this the state up into a series of marsh units. These are areas of broadly similar land use, land cover, and hydrology, and they provide a framework for us to assess all of those metrics within this framework. They were created automatically and reviewed by staff from these groups. So what does the data show us? Overall, this is showing the results again on that traffic scale from low resilience in red to high in green. And then the marsh migration space is shown in purple. You can see there's lots of highly resilient marsh, particularly in the southern Great Bay and in the Hampton Seabrook estuary. And where the marshes are least resilient, it can be for several reasons, but it's most commonly because they're in areas of high-sided topography or where there's a lot of built infrastructure. Most resilient marshes throughout the state are scattered, if they're not just all located in one particular region, and they're highlighted here. And the most resilient marsh in the state by far is at Odeon Point. We haven't done any kind of a formal accuracy assessment, but anecdotal review shows that our modeling really matches pretty well with field conditions. In the left, we show a high resilient marsh from the modeling along the Swampscott. And in the right hand photograph, you can see it was a red model marsh along the Comet Creek to the south of Adams Point. So we can pull out and look at some of these metrics to assess various indices of marsh health. In the low marsh is formed just by the grass species Spartina alterniflora. It's the only plant that can tolerate twice daily flooding. So in a healthy marsh, it forms a pretty narrow band between tidal waters and the high marsh plateau. Then that interface between high to low marsh is a local indication of mean high water. And so as a marsh that's starting to get flooded out, the proportion of low marsh will increase. And then eventually over time, if there's a barrier, it will experience a reduction of overall area or coastal squeeze. So this is the distribution of salt marsh around the state by community. And it shows the relative proportion of high marsh in light green, low marsh in dark. The most healthy high marsh plateaus can be found in Northampton, and you can see that Dover is the community that's marshes are actually experiencing the most flooding. Another metric is the proportion of marsh plants to standing water or bare mud on the marsh surface, or the UVVR, unvegetated to vegetated ratio. It's if that ratio is 1, then the marsh is basically functioning as a mud flat. And it's been shown that the 0.15 ratio is a tipping point when the marsh starts to become unstable. And there are just 2 communities in New Hampshire, Newington and Portsmouth, that are at or above that line, with Northampton at a close second. And if you think about lower communities with fairly built up shorelines, then on the positive side, looking at how marshes may adapt, this is how it spreads out across our communities. Rye and Hampton have particularly locked the potential, and this was modeled using an update of our sea level rise that was affected marshes model, or SLAM results. And even though Dover was showing that their marshes are currently flooding, they also have quite a high potential for migration there. So all is not lost at all. So some ways that we could potentially use this information to support our decision making. In addition to looking at those individual metrics, we can actually look at the overall totals for each of these marsh categories or elements of resilience, as we're terming them. So how does a single marsh look overall in terms of current condition, in terms of all the metrics that make up vulnerability and its adaptation potential? And if we do that, looking at the highs and the lows, there are 8 different categories that a particular marsh might fall into. On the top of this, and so this is one of the products we put together, is this marsh management options table. And it suggests specific approaches to marsh management based on these elements of resilience. So on the top, it's a marsh that's got a high current condition, is not very vulnerable to sea level rise, that has a high adaptation potential. So that's a healthy marsh that's likely to self-sustain long into the future. So it's a prime candidate for land conservation. And then we can pull up different management options for each different marsh type. And as Lynn mentioned at the beginning, this was done through a really collaborative process that Corey navigated for us. So it's got different brains, it's got academic voice, it's got restoration practitioners, policy people. So that's how we put this together. And this is just another example. So this is a marsh that's in pretty good shape, but there actually is a barrier to its adaptation with potential in migration. So management approaches in this case would be to remove infrastructure or make it more permeable if possible. But all of those words from that management option table can be summarized into this this summary table. So as I mentioned before, a marsh in good shape is a priority for conservation. Then one with low current condition would be one where we focus traditional restoration practices. And then you can see as it falls out. And there are 3 different categories that actually require 2-stage or multiple phase restoration approaches when 2 or more elements of resilience are impaired. And so we're not saying that we can't work there, we just know that if we do choose to, it will just be a more timely and costly investment to work and increase marsh resilience in those areas. So we can look at those management options and how they shape out spatially. So from a particular marsh perspective, it's kind of a screening tool to start our thinking of what might be most appropriate to enhance marsh resilience. Or we can look at it from a different perspective. As a land protection person, for example, I could see where the green areas are around the state as to where land protection might be most beneficial and cost effective. The same goes if I'm a restoration professional. We can also use the data to support spatial planning to inform our strategic and well thought out natural resource management. This is one example that we've already put together using the high resolution habitat data Kevin overviewed that informed a lot of this modeling. So it recognized that small populations of Phragmites, if we have most chance of effectively managing them and eradicating them, and they also have more potential impact to the marsh ecological health because they're likely to be spread into previously uninfested areas. So we can prioritize those. That's a good place to start. We also hope the data can help us to identify research and restoration sites. So this is just another example of what we've put together, looking at megapools. So that we again use the high res and marsh resiliency data to identify pools and pans that were more than a ½ acre in size. We use the expert, or we're kind enough to have the help of Dave Burdick from UNH, who uses extensive field knowledge to fine tune some of that mapping, saying, oh, you know, those pools are actually connected, you should treat them as one, and just small tweaks like that. All of the data that we're talking about can be, and the megapools already has been saved as a KMZ file, so we can use it with any phone or mobile device, and so you can have it with you out in the field. And so you can combine it with other spatial data for your planning. So, for instance, this example looks at finding megapools that are within 500 feet of a road. So where can we logistically get equipment to identify areas for good restoration? Or you could potentially be looking for opportunities to co-locate with other information, such as where our SETs, surface elevation tables, exist. So just a theoretical example of how you could use it. Now, where do we find the information? Now we've just been given this whistle-stop overview of it. If you're a GIS analyst, you can download the data at UNH's Granite, which is the state spatial clearinghouse. If you can find it super easily by just doing a search using the term tidal wetlands. And this will also bring up the SLAM update that we did recently. And then we've been talking about the Salt Marsh Plan because it's much more than just the spatial data. We've developed this series of supporting products that we hope will make the information more easy to use. And we're here to stand behind it and help it be useful to you in any way we can possible. And I'm just going to overview these things super quickly. As Kevin said, we approached this looking at an analogy to the freshwater report cards. So these marsh profiles we're creating for each of the 224 marsh units that we have. They overview the existing habitat, the resiliency metrics, and then they also give priority recommended management options in these three categories of land conservation, restoration or adaptation, and in land use policy and planning. And so these recommendations are made very objectively based on the data that we have. And we are slowly going to roll these out as we hear them be requested. So this is the one I've finalized at this point, but I can plan to continue to keep putting these together. Then we have put together a user guide about this plan, how the data was developed, a brief overview results, and how you can access it. And this is there's also an online viewer where you can move the map around, scroll to a marsh that you have some particular interest in. When you click it, it'll show the overall marsh resilience score. All of these are on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most resilient. It'll also show you its current condition, vulnerability, and adaptation potential. When you click on that, it will also show if the marsh is flooding or keeping up with sea level rise by showing the proportion of high to low marsh. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, it will show you the recommended management option based on that table that I showed earlier. It also brings up a window that you can see inset in the map where you can download the marsh profile. As I say, there is only one that's up there at the moment, that's for Odeon, that we will be adding to this. And then if you scroll down, it shows you in detail all of the individual results for the data that comprise that resiliency. So the 19 metrics that I overviewed at the beginning of this talk. You can click on a tab that shows you the marsh management category. So again, if you're looking out your window at a marsh, you can see by this map whether we recommend it's a conservation priority, a restoration or adaptation priority, or if it's going to take significant investment to increase resiliency. And you can then flip it and use it as a screening tool. I'm interested in looking at a restoration practice that reduces marsh vulnerability. Where do those marshes of that type exist throughout the state? So where might it make most sense for me to work? We also have a tab which highlights these few metrics that comprise the overall resiliency score, and these we highlighted because they're ones that we might be able to do something about. We can't necessarily affect the habitat diversity as easily, but we can influence the amount of impervious surface in the surrounding area of the marsh. So this is again is available on the viewer. A big shout out to Lynn who's been putting together building out this website with support from Becky McKnight. They've put together a how-to user guide and some video tutorials on this. And then there's also a tab at the top you can click to give us feedback about the plan, but also to ask for technical support or for a specific marsh profile. As I said, we're really trying to stand behind this data, not just put it out there and say, run with it, but say, run with it. And if you have interest, where we can, we will happily support you, do additional modeling. And so this is the quick form that we ask you to fill out. It's just a quick Google form. And this is so we can keep track of who's interested, and it will help us build more support documents and tools over time as we see where this is being used. Another thing that we hope to have up in the next couple of weeks on the website is the statewide and community summary. So for each town and city, I'm looking at doing a summary of the various indices of marsh health for that particular geography, and then also overviewing the best management options. And then finally on the website, we've put together some products that help with site level planning, because we totally recognize that a lot of the spatial stuff is really helpful for identifying broad management goals and for site screening. The individual projects are always going to be designed by small scale parameters that are specific to that site. So we have put together just a field assessment data sheet that might get you going when you're out looking eyes and boots on the marsh. We've put together a table of land use planning options and also restoration practices, saying if they're highly expensive or if they're more economical and that kind of thing. So just some quick examples of how this marsh plan data has been used. We're hoping that it's useful for environmental consultants, for communities and natural resource planners and practitioners and academics. It's already been incorporated into a recent update of Connect to Protect, the land protection plan for the coastal watershed of New Hampshire. And then the original mapping was used in our last 2015 Wildlife Action Plan, but now the prioritization of salt for the salt marsh habitat that's been created because of this plan is going to be included in the 2025 update that we're working on currently. As I said, we try and stand, or we commit to standing behind our offer of technical assistance. We've got an example of this where we've worked with the Seabrook Hamptons Estuary Alliance. They had identified a whole suite of parcels in marsh and next to marsh that they were interested in reaching out to see if the owners wanted to put into protection. But there was, I don't know, 170 or so. There were a lot of tracks, and so they asked us, using our prioritization, where might it make most sense to start? So we scored most highly those marshes that fell into the good current condition, not very vulnerable, likely to self-sustain, and then gave a 0 score to marshes, areas of marsh that are likely to blink out, and prioritize in that way to give an overall prioritization map for them. And we're currently working on an update based on the finalized data. Newcastle was kind enough to reach out to us and has incorporated the marsh resilience and marsh migration space in their recent master plan update. And then Fish and Game, Katie and myself and Adrian Kovac, Pam Hunt from Audubon and UNH, and others put together, used the marsh resiliency and some ancillary data, put together a prioritization of where salt marsh habitat might exist throughout the state. And this was done at the request of Fish and Wildlife Service and Atlantic Coast Joint Venture. And then we're hoping to update this fairly soon based on the thesis results of Grace McCullough, who's a NOAA David Fellowship fellow, and she's actually been out looking at not just where birds exist, but their breeding success. So we've got real data that she's correlated with a few of the parameters that we can use to create models, and shows which ones of those are most effective. So we can update our salt marsh map, prioritization map for that. And with that, I just want to hand over to Sarah, who has some more examples of how she's used information.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel, so much. So happy to see those examples. And a thank you to you and Lynn and the rest of the reserve staff for having me today to participate as well, to give my part. I like how you called it the plan in the real world, or in the wild, maybe we'll say. So thank you again. At FBE, we've incorporated the Salt Marsh Plan into 3 plans or reports that are primarily planning and management-based tools and documents. My 3 examples are the Hampton Seabrook Estuary Management Plan, which we worked with the Seabrook Hamptons Estuary Alliance, or SHEA. Good to see some people from SHEA on the call today. We also incorporated the plan and data into the Stratham Open Space and Connectivity Plan with the town of Stratham, as well as the Natural Resource Inventory Report with the town of Hampton. And I thought that I would kind of give perspective of how we used it, but also I thought that it was kind of interesting, just like each of the groups and who were the players at the table that were interested in the data. So for the Hampton Seabrook Estuary Management Plan, the plan was developed in 2021 through 2022. It's a plan that spans multiple towns and is in collaboration with a multidisciplinary group and organization that brings together people from multiple agencies as well as towns. The purpose of the Estuary Management Plan was to develop goals to identify available information, identify gaps in information, and develop targeted goals and metrics. So through this project, we initially connected with Corey and Rachel, where we learned about the Salt Marsh Plan, and they were very kind to let us learn about the data and available information really early on in the process. So I heard feedback from them that we were kind of an early user of information for this project, which was very fun and very neat. Versus the Stratham Open Space and Connectivity Plan, it's an ongoing project that we began in 2023. It's an initiative of the town of Stratham, who created a subcommittee consisting of planners, the town recreation department representatives, conservation commission members, amongst other town members, town representatives, as well as FBE, and then a planning consulting firm. The purpose of this plan was to strive to support the town in creating an open space network that balances protecting significant resources while creating opportunities for public access, public recreation, and enhancing the community's character and desirability. And then my 3rd example of it in the wild, in the real world, is the Hampton Natural Resource Inventory that we are currently working on with the town of Hampton Conservation Commission. Great to see members of that group here today as well. We began that plan in 2023, and we're in the final stages of editing and finalization. But as I mentioned, it's a subcommittee with the Conservation Commission, and the project works to identify a town-wide inventory of natural resources for the Commission's use for planning and management. Still, while I'm on this slide, I thought I would highlight additional uses for additional ways to how we used the Salt Marsh Plan for the Stratham Open Space and Connectivity Plan. So we use the marsh units and the data about the marsh units in our existing conditions review for Stratham, which played into understanding the valuable natural resources in the community. We also used the marsh units to lay out and see natural resources that possibly should be more protected or could potentially be available for open space access and recreation. All right, next slide, please, Rachel. Perfect. Diving into the Hampton Seabrook Estuary Management Plan, the way that we use the Salt Marsh Plan a little bit more. As I mentioned, it was in the early days of the Salt Marsh Plan. So both of these images are actually directly from GitHub. So thank you for providing us with these resources that we included directly into the management plan. So we referenced each of the estuary's marsh units. So the image to the left, you can see all the units in different colors that are categorized by their project or their potential project suitability. So land protection, improving current condition, reducing vulnerability, facilitating migration, or areas where you might want to limit investment because they were identified as being heavier lift, more time intensive marsh units to establish a goal of restoration. So we included those as well as use the resilience scores to identify and prioritize conservation land. So I really loved your slide, Rachel, that it sounds like things have even taken the next step of drilling into those parcels that are prioritized for conservation, what ones really rise to the top. We also included in the report information about habitat. So it was really important for us to include, the salt marsh sparrow prioritized blocks and areas so that SHAE can use that in their planning and management decisions. As well as we mapped and discussed marsh migration and the vulnerabilities that the marshes in the Hampton Seabrook Estuary face to sea level rise, as well as groundwater rise and loss due to loss of marsh due to inundation. Okay, next slide. And then my last example, the Hampton Natural Resource Inventory. We included the marsh units that are situated in Hampton into what we call a co-occurrence analysis, or a heat map showing high density natural resource areas to aid in Hampton's prioritization of conservation, management, and planning. As well as we've emphasized the marsh units where conservation is the top management recommendation within the report. The map I have shown here is using the marsh units, but drilling down into the management options. We are showing high, medium, low, and very rarely categories for the prioritization of investment. And that's based off of, and I apologize, but the table is very small at the bottom, but those scores came out of the current condition score, the current vulnerability to relative sea level rise, and the condition of adaptation potential. So the units that are represented as high had the high current condition, low vulnerability, and high adaptation potential to highlight maybe the units, the areas of marsh to first prioritize and focus on. Let's see. Yeah, and with that, that's my high level overview of the 3 ways that we've used the Salt Marsh Plan. And I'll give it back to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'll hand it over to Corey to entertain any questions or comments if people have them.
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions in the chat, and I think that Katie Callahan handled one of them by forwarding the NOAA technical report. So take a look at that if you're interested in the data behind the high resolution habitat classification. And there's also a suggestion to share the links to the plans that we've seen so far. So thanks to those of you who have been using the chat. And I'd love to just open it up to see if people do have questions at this point. You can just raise your hand and use that function. Or you also could take yourself off mute.
We'll add that the Hampton Seabrook Estuary Management Plan is the only plan that I presented that's final. So I'll add that link here, and then stay tuned on final. It's going to be a story map for the Stratum Open Space and Connectivity Plan and a final draft of the Hampton NRI.
Yeah, and if people haven't had a chance, Lynn also forwarded, kind of where you can find all of the tools that are associated with what's been presented. And in particular, if you want to cruise around on the viewer, that might be of interest to people to get a feel for what it looks like, and you can zoom into your favorite marsh if you'd like.
And sometimes takes a little bit of time for the data to load, but be patient, it's worth the wait. Don't give up on it.
That's right. Okay. I don't see any raised hands. And there's no problem in ending a lunchtime webinar a tiny bit early. I do see, Lynn, did you have something you wanted to say to the group?
Well, I was just going to share something else that I saw in chat that I think was a
Sure.
direct message to me that's kind of fun. Dwight, if he's on, you're welcome to kind of chime in here, but he is on the Conservation Commission in Durham and had a kind of a specific application in mind. He thought, really getting information on the marsh units within Durham would be super helpful and timely because the town is revising their wetland and shoreline ordinances, and the Conservation Commission is going to recommend buffer widths based on the buffer options for the Bay project, which is another Gibbner or Great Bay Reserve project. And to do this, we need good local examples to justify wider buffer widths. So I don't know if you want to share anything else in response to that application, Corey.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that this is a good example that if you'd like to reach out, we can maybe partner up and take a closer look at all the maps to really make sure that what's being provided is just what you need, and maybe give some tips on which elements of what's in the tool might be most useful for your application. So, happy to help Durham a little bit more with that. Is this Dwight Trueblood?
Yes, it is.
Hey.
Hi, Dwight.
How you doing? Yeah, I'm on the Conservation Commission. They convinced me to
Great.
be the chair this year. Anyway, in the process of doing this, the commission has been using the Bob project, and this looks like a really good tool as well, because one of the questions we've been getting is, well, how threatened are the wetlands really in this area? And do we really need 330-foot buffers or 250-foot buffers in order to allow for marsh migration and other things like that? So I think having really good local examples is going to help us sell increasing those buffer widths to the planning board and the town council as we move forward.
Yeah, that's great, because there are, in that current condition layer, there's some information about threats that could be applied townwide, which is kind of nice.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Dwight, thank you so much. This is exactly the kind of thing that we're hoping to support. And it was awesome that Sarah gave some examples in other communities and that kind of stuff. And one thing that I did want to say is our current framework of marsh units is really done for the sort of the planning scale. So that's where we're going to do those marsh profiles for that scale. But we recognize when it gets down to individual restoration plans and creating site-specific products, a smaller framework nested within that will be helpful. And all of that data can then be available for each of those nested marsh units. So that would be helpful for different applications. We don't plan to put together marsh profiles for all of those because it's going to be several hundred, but that will help with, downscaling even further the information contained in this plan.
Great. Well, I'll be in touch with you guys, I think, because I'd
Great.
like to see what's under the hood on this sometimes. So
Great. I also see a plug in here that Mitch has put in for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Coastal Wetland Conservation Grants. That might be a good fit for projects that people have in mind that are, in that high priority land protection zone. Mitch, do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, just that this grant program is great for a few reasons. One, right now it's not very competitive, so they're all getting funded, which is wonderful. The match ratio is relatively low. Some in-kind match, like land value, for a restoration, like a notice of federal participation on the underlying fee could be used as match. So potentially no match is needed depending on, you know, whether in-kind match is an option. So the match ratio is very low, and it's also very size insensitive. So unlike the other grant program I work in, which has done a lot around Great Bay, which is NACA, you know, NACA projects tend to be like in the 1,000 acres or more. And coastal grants will give you $1 million to do like a 25-acre restoration. So it's very size insensitive, which is, you know, very sharply in contrast to NACA. But the one caveat is that a state agency has to apply, like Fish and Game or DEP or something. So they can pass 100% of the funds through, and a lot of states do that. Maine does that almost every year. They get the grant and just pass it on to partners. But, you know, they have to be willing to, even if someone ghostwrites the proposal, the state has to be willing to kind of administer the grant, make sure that the reporting is done, and so on.
Yeah. Thank you, Mitch. Good thing for us to keep in mind. Okay. Any other questions?
That kind of made me think of going in on like a grant together, and like multiple towns coming up with different restoration projects, so that it was maybe possibly one grant that like somebody at DES would maybe administer. Just with a thought. And I know that towns have been doing that with there was a NOAA funding that I'm blanking on the name of, but I believe CAW helped organize the collection of all the projects to go towards one grant.
Yeah. It's a good idea, and I think yeah, we're really interested in, you know, collecting those ideas to see how we can help even with matchmaking with the funding, and see where we can scale up. Okay. Well, I just maybe I'll just say a huge thank you to everybody for spending your lunch hour with us, and a big thank you to the people who volunteered to speak, our partners Sarah and Kevin, and especially Rachel for sharing all of your technical knowledge. And thank you, Katie, for being here and being able to be our technical backstop at every corner of this project.